Hey, welcome back to The Road You Took, the show where we dig into the real life decisions that shape careers, character, and everything in between. Today's guest is someone who brings ancient wisdom into modern relevance in a way I promise you've never heard before. Dr. John Buttaci is a professor at Catholic University of America and has a doctorate in ancient philosophy from the University of Pittsburgh. And get this, is one of the only guys I know who can make Plato feel like a leadership coach you'd actually hire today.
That's good.
Talking, we're talking about influence, decision making, retention, and how to lead with wisdom, not just hustle. If you've ever led a team, a business, or even family, what we cover today will hit home.
2,400 years ago.
2,400 years ago.
2,300 years ago, maybe.
It's more relevant today than ever before. So let's jump in here. Welcome, John.
Happy to be here. This is great.
So this is unlike what you're used to in academia. It's a little bit less stressful. It's a little bit more, dungarees than suits, and we're just going to talk. Is that fair with you?
Fair enough.
Disclaimer right off the bat, I know John for a little while. It seems he married one of my daughters and is my son-in-law. So if we do, I don't want to call him Dr. Buttaci, but that's what he is. He's a doctor, University of Pittsburgh, right? What year was that?
2016.
2016, so almost 10 years ago. And before that, you went to Notre Dame. That's where you met my darling daughter, correct?
That's right.
Most people think Plato or Aristotle or any of the other ancient philosophers. John's an ancient philosopher major. That's what he teaches every day. I'm not, so please forgive me. Tell us a little bit about these people, how they came in succession. Who was first? Who jumped on the bandwagon and who finished it off?
So that's a great question. I know that there's a lot of attention given to Stoicism lately, a lot of authors looking at the Stoics, and that was a popular philosophical view in the Roman Empire. But the Roman Empire was drawing on all of this stuff that had already happened in ancient Greece. So, when you think of the big Roman emperors, Julius Caesar, the golden age of Greece was 400 years before that. And so Plato was one of the first philosophers whose writings we have in their entirety. And he himself was a student of Socrates. And Socrates was a popular philosopher in Athens in the 5th century. And like all popular philosophers, he was executed by his
They didn't like his ideas?
They didn't like him. Well, there were a lot of people who were what we might call professional philosophers, politicians, public speakers, university professors, this kind of thing in the 5th century. And they were charging a lot of money if you came to them for training.
Okay.
And so Athens became what was then a world power after beating the Persians in the Persian War. And then there was a kind of golden age of flourishing in Athens. The history there might not be so important, but let's just say there's a lot of money to be made in the public square. So Socrates entered that world and started asking people hard questions, people that were supposedly experts. He was the pain that came in there and asked the supposed expert questions that turns out they can't answer. And so he became very popular for calling out everybody's BS effectively. And so he wanted the young people to pursue virtue and true excellence and to think really hard about what was really important in this culture where their attention is being divided in lots of different directions. A lot of people warring for their attention.
It sounds like it's something that's happening now with
That's
everything
exactly
that's going
right.
on.
That's why I put it that way. There's a lot of money to be made getting people's attention. And if you're the customer, you have to think, well, what's really the best for me?
Well, how do you find that out? How did he find, what was the difference? How did he help the people that were just walking around?
Well, so this is what's great about Socrates and what got him into so much trouble is he didn't think he was actually that smart. He thought that he was the wisest person because he was aware of his own limits. his own ignorance, what he didn't know. And so he thought that one of the most important things is intellectual humility,
Intellectual humility.
recognizing that you might not know it all. And so he was great at asking questions. Now, if you were a person of goodwill, a young person that really wanted to, you know, understand the world and understand people, you were inspired by Socrates because he was the kind of guy who would want to get to the bottom of things, learn from everybody. But if you're the kind of person that wants to wear a mask, that wants to kind of pull a fast one on people, wants to appear to be an expert when you really don't know anything, then you were afraid of somebody like Socrates because he could expose you as a fraud. Now, he's I don't know that Socrates would have a podcast. He was known for being kind of poor. He'd just sort of be around. He was the kind of guy who would go to a bunch of lectures and be the pain that asked that one question that could really crack a conversation open. So with some people, he was really popular, but obviously with the power structures in place, he made a lot of enemies. And so he was executed in 399 BC. But you asked me about Plato and how Plato comes in on this. Plato,
Before we jump to Plato, let's get
Sure.
back to Socrates. And you said that he asked a lot of questions. And of course, we have nowadays, we call it the Socratic method
That's
of
right.
questioning,
That's right.
where we're curious and we want to know more. We're asking questions, and maybe some of those questions are trying to find out, are you real or are you giving me BS? Are you bullshit?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's part of the Socratic.
Yeah, it's funny. The Socratic method, it means
Tell me about it.
tons of different things for
Right.
people. I don't know if people have heard this. If you've gone to law school, you've heard of the Socratic method because it's allegedly the way that law schools have traditionally conducted their lectures. And it just means that the professor is asking the students questions about the cases that are under consideration in the class. But the kind of questioning that Socrates did was one-on-one. It wasn't before an audience usually. He certainly didn't give lectures in the way that we understand it. He didn't have a school or a university. He didn't run anything that formal. He didn't collect money for giving courses. So when you read the dialogues of Plato and when you read some other ancient reports of Socrates, he's asking these one-on-one questions, and often it's with an intent of a joint inquiry, a common conversation to get at some deeper truth. And so often they're working through everyday life examples. So he'll think through, well, you're a sailor on a ship. You have some experience with that. What's it like when you have a mutiny on your hands and the captain loses control of things, right? Let's think through that example. What would justice and virtue and character mean in that situation? Or what would courage mean on the battlefield? So he takes these life examples that were very familiar to the people he's talking to, and would interrogate those examples. He would put people, and then he would kind of change the example. He said, but what if this happened, right? What if somebody came in and said this in the midst of that mutiny? Or suppose you didn't really want to support the mutiny, but you realized that the momentum of the sailors were going that direction. How could you best help the captain without being thrown overboard yourself? So he would take examples and then he would twist them a little bit to get people thinking in those scenarios. So it was kind of what we would call wargaming or working through different scenarios. That's the kind of thing that we see in these dialogues. And oftentimes they're political, they're military examples, because that's what was common.
But isn't in today's world, in leadership and in organizations, isn't that a political way anyway? I mean, you're in a big organization.
Yeah.
You've got different
That's right.
factions coming at you. And with those questions and with those alliances, people go this way, people go that way. How do you relate that to today's world? Whether it's you're in an organization with warring factions that they want this leadership gone, and how do we work this whole thing in there?
Well, so
what lesson do we take away?
Yeah, right. So one thing you said, it's political. And one thing I'd like to say is the most important work of Plato's and Plato's chief hero in his dialogues is his teacher Socrates. So a lot of what we think of as Socratic, having to do with Socrates, it comes through the writings of Plato, his student.
Sure.
And some people have said, well, maybe that's not the real Socrates. Maybe this is the
Because
Socrates.
Socrates never really
He
wrote
didn't write
anything
anything
down.
down. I mean,
Right.
he was just a conversationalist. But Plato's Republic is
That's
the
a book.
most important book
That's a
that
book.
we get. It's a 300-page. It's excellent. It's maybe the most important thing written from that period,
Really.
and it's about every aspect of philosophy. But when you hear the title Plato's Republic, you think, "Oh, that's political philosophy." That's not for me. And there's really two things to say there. The first is, well, we have politics in every aspect of our life, right? So we talk about the politics of the boardroom or the politics of negotiating a sale or negotiating a contract or this or that. So we talk about politics in this broader sense anyway today. And that's certainly there in the works of Plato and the thinking of Socrates. But the other thing I would say, and this is an insight that I think we could really recover from that period, is that they thought about the political good or the good of the political community as intrinsically bound up with, as just tightly bound up with education and professional leadership and coaching and military strategy. All of these things were bound together, and they thought of the political community as unified in all of these different enterprises. So when they thought about, what do we need in a political leader? Who are we going to back in our political? They're going to look to professional success. They're going to look to how the person operates as a merchant or as a captain. And they're going to look to that person's education. And so all of these themes that we sometimes compartmentalize, we think
Right.
about education, we think about coaching, we think about career development. We think about all these things over here, and then you don't talk about politics. They didn't think of it that way. It was far more unified, and you might think that that's something we could learn from them. Imagine if we thought of education as the first step in developing future leaders, right? And we're
Sure.
in some veins, we're starting to think about education that way a little bit more. It's not about just learning abstract facts. It's about forming people. And what's important, I think, about Plato is he's the first source for us of a kind of unified document or a unified body of texts where he's thinking through these ideas about education, leadership, justice, the political good. He's thinking about those things together and in a unified, systematic way. And for him, the way he presents that systematic thinking is through conversation. So that's where we come back to the Socratic method. The way that he's inviting even us 2,400 years later, the way that he invites us into that thoughtfulness, that unified thinking about politics, education, leadership, coaching, and so forth. He does that through one-on-one conversation. So you can feel like you're sitting there watching these guys talk, you know. And so that's, I think it's part of what makes it so attractive and inspiring to me is that I get invited into something as opposed to something that's really abstract, like an encyclopedia entry or something like that.
Cool. When you listen to it, it makes sense, and it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're dealing with the Republic. One of the things you turned me on to a few months ago was the allegory of the cave,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, that's got to do with leadership. That's got to do with you're a leader. You go out and you learn, come back, and you try. In my world, anyway, you try to come back and teach the people that are still in the cave,
Yeah.
and you can give a deeper insight into that.
Yeah.
My rudimentary thing is I'm a leader. I go out, I learn, I bring it back, I teach, I grow the leader so they leave the cave.
Yeah.
And eventually we have enough leaders out there that are on the same page that are helping people, you know, understand that there is a world outside the cave. No puppets.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if people are familiar with that image. It's the most famous image from the Republic. And in fact, I mean, you'll have high school English textbooks that just take the 3 pages out of the Republic
Right.
and just you read that allegory itself. And the idea is it's presented as an image for understanding education. And what he says is,
Education in our context right here, education is corporate teams,
Yeah.
not so much basic education.
Yeah. Well, and I think it can apply to lots of different areas. And the idea is that the people start kind of trapped in a cave, but they don't know that they're trapped in a cave. They don't know where they are. They don't know the limits.
So they're on
What
it.
they're
For me, they're in a team and they have no idea what's outside it.
Yeah,
All they
yeah,
know is that the team feeds them, they give them leads, they do
yeah.
all the, but they don't know what's
A-
outside
And
here.
what they're seeing in the cave, as Socrates tells us in the Republic, and he just dreamt up this
Sure.
story, right?
Sure.
And there's a big theme in ancient literature, even before Plato, about the descent, the going down into the darkness, and whether it be into the underworld or into some foreign land that's unexplored, this descent. And so he turns that image, the cave image. You got to think. I don't know if you've ever been to a cave, but sometimes the tour guides, some of the caves are so commercialized. There's lights
Right.
everywhere,
How
and you
can
get to see all kinds of interesting stuff. But the most striking thing about being in a cave is when the tour guide says, "Everybody turn your lights off." It's the only time I've ever experienced your eyes are open, but you can't see the hand in front of your face. And then, that one person turns on their flashlight and then you just see the tiny little bit of what you can see. And you got to try to get back into the minds of those who didn't have easy light, easy
there
illumination.
was no
right?
light back
They had flames. That's it. They had fire. And so the way these people begin is they're tied up in the cave and they're watching shadows of puppets on the wall. And so there's somebody back higher up in the cave who's got a fire. So they have light and they have puppets. And they're making little images for people to watch. It sounds a lot like television or Instagram reels. In other words, they're controlling everything these people in the cave see.
So how would you analogize that to today?
Right? So there's two steps away from reality, right? So there's it's sort of like an Instagram reel, which is itself fake, and what it's presenting to you is curated by somebody else. So there's 2 degrees of fakeness. It's that you're not seeing the real person, and then even the person that's being depicted has been, they've gotten all kinds of makeup. They've got everything has been
Filters.
It's been filtered. It's been doctored in all kinds of ways. And it's because there's somebody back there that wants you to see it a certain way, just like in the cave. So the idea is that there's a certain stage where you don't even know to look around. You don't even know to look to say,
This is
what's making that
yeah,
shadow?
This is what
right?
I'm focused on.
And so there's this second step that you got to get up to see, wait a minute, there's people back there manipulating those shadows. They're sort of tricking me. And then the step is, holy crap, there's a whole world outside of this that's real. That guy was making a shadow puppet of a dog or a tree or whatever. But when you get outside the cave, that's the real stuff. And so the first lesson of all of this is that there's appearances and there's reality. That things aren't always what they seem. And you sometimes have to question the way things appear to you and question the motives of those people who are presenting those appearances to you. So you can see how Socrates would be dangerous in a political environment where certain people control the images, control the messaging, right? Because he's training people to turn around and look, to ask questions. Who wants you to see the shadow that way? Who wants you to see the reel that way or the advertisement that way? And why do they want you to see it that way? So that's, I think, maybe the first lesson. But the other lesson that he says is when you turn and you see the fire for the first time, or when you turn and you start going up out of the cave and you see the sunlight for the first time, it's painful. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes we might use the word, it's sobering, that it's uncomfortable, it's sobering to see things as they really are. It can be frightening. And so there's something dark about the light, right? There's something maybe you think grim or dark or uncomfortable about seeing things in the light. But then he says, but your eyes adjust. And that's what sometimes it takes a little bit of force. Sometimes it takes a little bit of encouragement from somebody who's saying, no, keep going. Keep moving out of the cave. Don't crawl back into the shadows just because it's comfortable. just because it's familiar.
And let me just interject because it's probably a question on a lot of people's minds that are listening, if I have the right listeners, of course. And that is get comfortable being uncomfortable at the
Yeah,
end of the day, right? Because
yeah,
you're seeing that light. We go through this with our clients or team members even. We have to help them get to the point where they're comfortable asking the questions of their prospects, and it just becomes second nature. Okay, I've accepted this now.
yeah,
What's next?
yeah. One way to put it is that this is an ancient image as well, is putting honey on the cup of the bitter medicine. So somebody's got to take the medicine, and it's not going to be pleasant. But you might put a little honey on there. And so the person's not going to take the medicine if it's totally bitter, totally painful. So you have to sweeten the deal somewhat. But there's some people that aren't interested in healing you, that are just going to give you straight honey, right? Because they don't actually care if you get healthy. So this is a very ancient idea that, like, you gotta, if you're a true doctor, if you're a true physician and you want to make somebody healthy, on the one hand, you know that sometimes the medicine's going to make them uncomfortable, might even hurt, but it's your job also to soften the blow a little bit. And so getting comfortable being uncomfortable, that's important as a student, as a somebody that's getting coached. But when you're the coach, when you're the physician, when you're the leader, I think you also have to be sensitive to the fact that people have their limits, and you got to take them step by step through the discomfort, through so that's what's nice about this, the cave image, is that it's a gradual discovery of the truth, because you got to meet people where they are. Right? You can only take so much hard truths at one time. And I imagine you find that with sales. You
Find it
can't
with
hit 'em.
sales. Yep. With sales, you got sales, you have to take your client through that process a little bit at a time. You can't say, well, you can't, if you rip the band aid off too hard,
Yeah,
it becomes reality, right?
right, right.
Oh, that hurts.
They're blinded,
They're blind.
literally
Right.
by the light. It's got to be
Exactly.
a gradual thing.
And the same thing with coaching clients. You meet them where they are, you solve that problem, you get them accustomed to that, and then you move them on to the next step.
Yeah,
And some people learn quicker than others. Some people learn not to touch the fire.
yeah,
Others want to just stay in that fire and keep getting burnt.
yeah.
So that's a good
And what's the other side of this too? I think from the point of view of the coach or the parent. I mean, I think about this a
parent.
lot. Parents, is that because it's going to be uncomfortable for your child, for your client, for your students, because you know it's going to be uncomfortable, maybe even painful. One of the ways that people take the edge off is by stepping in and doing it for them,
Saving them.
saving. Yeah, and that's something I think that's important about this cave image too. Is that Socrates says y- the whole image of education, development, coaching is the person themselves being led to see for themselves. You can't see it for them. You are leading them to see with their own eyes.
I'm your savior, not your. I'm your leader, not your savior.
Or to
Type
put
of
it
thing.
this way, what Socrates, he often described himself as a midwife. He was somebody that would help people give birth to their own ideas,
Yeah.
but he's not the parent of those ideas. He's just helping you. And so he says this, I think, this amazing phrase. He says, education is not like injecting sight into eyes that are blind, but it is turning those eyes toward what they ought to see. So this is what you're saying, you're dealing with your clients, you're taking them step by step, but you're assuming that your clients, that your children, that they have to see it for themselves and that they can see it for themselves, right? Your coach, I mean, I think the image of a coach is perfect. If you want somebody to learn how to swing a bat or swing a club, pitch a baseball, you as the coach are observing them do it. And then you give them pointers. Try doing it this way. But your activity as the coach is all about shaping and leading them through doing it for themselves. And that is straight Plato. That's right there. Because part of the theory of education that he was rejecting and of coaching and of leadership was Like, I am the leader, I do everything, I micromanage, and that had a technical term back then. It was called tyranny. We call, and you might hear
I
that,
think we
just like
still call it
you
tyranny.
see petty tyrants and the people that, but micromanagers, he says that I mean, he just calls that tyranny. And these people, at first, they might succeed because there's certain kind of people that want to work for somebody like that because it means they don't have to do it. They just punch the clock, right? And so I think part of what Plato is trying to, and of course, nothing's new under the sun. A lot of people listening are like, I've heard this already. The amazing thing is, this has its roots in Plato 2,400 years ago, 2,300 years ago. Uh, so, so that's what I like about it, is it's about empowering, right? It's about unlocking in somebody a potential that's already there. And you do that not by pouring knowledge into them, but by cultivating something that's already there, like gardening or like growing a fire or something like this. There's already a spark there in everybody that then you turn, you cultivate, you grow.
Allegory of the cave. Now, we've got the person that's sitting there watching the puppets. He finds the fire. But isn't the rest of the story about the guy who goes out and brings back the knowledge?
Yeah. So
So
that's yeah.
let's finish that
Good.
story up.
Good. So one of the things that Socrates says is that you might think that when you get out of that cave, well, you're in heaven. You're you're in reality. And all those poor souls down there, oh, God love them, but I'm out.
There's
I'm free. What he says is, and remember, this is an allegory for educating, and not just for any education, it's for educating leaders, right? He says, we're not going to let them just stay up there. They need to go back down. And one of the things, when you're leaving the cave, your eyes hurt because you're seeing the sunlight for the first time. You're seeing real stuff for the first time. But the other kind of way that your eyes might hurt is when you go back down in the cave, that you're not used to the darkness. But what he says is, because he's been outside the cave and he's seen what that fire, what that fake artificial light, that fire, it's imitating the sunlight, which is the real natural light. And those puppets, he can see, oh, I've seen real dogs, and I've seen real trees, and I've seen real, etc. And so he knows what the puppets are imitating, and he knows what real shadows are, because he's seen real shadows outside the cave. So he realizes what he's really looking at. So once his eyes adjust, he's able to see that stuff better than anybody that's been trapped in there. And so he can now win at the contests and competitions about making the best shadows and making the best images and making the best reels and
because
making the
he
best.
knows what it looks like.
That's right,
from the outside.
because he knows the reality. And so this is Plato saying, look, if you know the reality, you're going to be that much better equipped at dealing with the imitations of reality. One way to put it is, things aren't always what they seem, but if you know the reality, if you know the real truth, then you can use the seeming to help people rather than to deceive people and manipulate people. So his idea is that having that knowledge from outside the cave, you go back in and help the people that are in there.
Help in what way?
Well, that's some people.
Because some people will take it, some people won't. There's always going to be a skeptic in there.
That's right.
How do you help that in 2,400 years ago and even today? You got the leader, he's outside, he understands, he knows the big picture. But if I go down back into the cave and I try to explain the big picture
Yeah.
to people that don't understand the big picture,
Yep.
they're going to go, "Oh, you're a friggin' nut."
At best, they'll say you're a nut. I mean, he even, what Socrates says is they might even try to kill him. And if, then what actually happened to Socrates, you think, oh, this is very interesting, right? So there's what we would call, in my world, a rhetorical challenge. There's you have to develop a strategy, because you can't come right out with it all at once. That's like just handing somebody the medicine that's really bitter. You got to find some way to soften the blow. So he actually talks about the cave as the political community that you go back down in.
So they're the general population,
the average
the
people.
GP.
And yeah, right. And you're going down in there, and sometimes in some contexts, the most that people can handle are shadow puppets. And so your job is to make sure that they are seeing shadows that are as accurate as can be. That you are not manipulating them, that you are serving their best interests as best as you can and as best as they're capable of receiving it in that context.
So before you go further,
Yeah.
hold the thought.
Yeah.
But you talk about general population where you have to soften the blow. You know, this, you know, they know what they know and that's all they know,
Yeah.
right? Could we say that that's the far right and the far left in today's world?
Well, you know, I'm thinking about that politically too. And what I think of when I think of the people that are in the cave and can't really make it out is I think about the people that are just trying to get by. They're trying to raise their kids. They're trying to do the best they can.
Right.
It's not the far left and the far right. It's the average Joe who's just trying to make it work.
And whatever's happening over there, it doesn't really bother.
And they say, well, maybe they want to be a part of it. Maybe they want to know, but they can't handle the detail.
Yeah.
And it's probably most of your listeners right now are like, Buttaci, you're giving me too much detail here. I'm a guy in the cave. I say, well, no, I think you can handle this medicine just a little bit of the bitter. But no, it's just like, think about sales or think about any specialized trade, right?
Okay.
I got a lot of, as you know, I just got a lot of work done in my house with the HVAC system, brand new. Like, if somebody comes in with a technical chart and says you need this many, you know, cubic feet of air and this many, so many things, and I don't even remember the different measurements. And part of me just wants to be like, look, I don't have time to learn everything you know, right? Part of what I'm relying on is I'm trusting that you know enough to do what needs to be done here. But like, when I hire somebody to fix my AC, I'm not paying him to train me in heating and cooling, right? I don't need that, right? So one way to put it is like, in that exchange, I'm the sheep and I don't need to know what the shepherd knows, right? I'm the sailor. I don't need to know what the captain and navigator know. I just to be the expert. And there's a lot of things like that.
So it's all right to be the expert. We're not saying
it's not bad. It's all right to be the sheep.
Right. It's not bad being a GP, the sheep, whatever you want to call them down the bottom. So either way, it's because we got to have that for society to exist.
And in fact, that's one of the core ideas that might be really unpopular today from Plato's Republic. So there's a couple ideas that people say Plato's Republic, you might have heard of it. It's very authoritarian, people say. It's very, you know, you've got that strong ruler who has all the knowledge and all the power. The other thing that he says is that everybody divides up into their own specialty. But when you think about it, it's actually kind of true that people are expert in their thing. There's people who are good at sales who would be awful at, you know, carpentry. And there's certainly people that I would be an awful salesman, but people have their own talents. So the way I interpret, you know, there's all kinds of experts that can argue about what Plato really meant and what's really being said here. But what I learned from this and what I tell my students is like, look, it's okay to be an expert, and it's okay to recognize that you're the sheep in certain. That's that intellectual humility we began with, right? Recognizing the limits of your knowledge, the limits of your skill set, and maybe you need to be trained in certain areas. And so that's where you make that progress out of the cave. But no one can know everything. No one can be an expert in everything. And I think that might be a way that our culture is different than ancient Greece. There's so much specialized knowledge now. It used to be that you could be generally educated and you could know pretty much expert knowledge about several things. That's really rare.
And it was very localized.
That's right. And
very
so,
local.
Like, think about navigating a ship. Sure. You had to know a lot about astronomy and weather and the different tools. But now there's so much more technical tools. You could be an expert in navigating one type of ship and be totally ignorant about other types. So there's been so much development of technology now, and so much deepening of our knowledge of these things, that it's really hard to be an expert in any one thing, and it's almost impossible to be an expert in more than one thing these
So how do
days.
we bring that back to the leadership? So let's say, my audience is usually real estate agents, real estate team leaders. How do we bring that? Where's the tie in to those people? What do you know about real estate?
Yeah, so there's the intellectual humility thing.
Right. Right.
I've
What do you know about?
bought a house or two, but
Right.
this is limit of
So,
my experience.
but it is a team. Most of them run
Yeah,
on teams, and you have the people, the general public, that go, you know what, I want to do my 40 hours. Give me the leads, and I'll make sure I close them. And
yeah.
compensation goes to the team leader, and I take X amount, and you take X amount. How does the whole cave allegory end up in today's society as far as I'm working at a 20-person team? I've got different people at different stages. How do I train the leaders to come up to the top stage so I can take my next position, which is overseer of the organization?
So that's a really interesting question in the Republic, um, because one of the things that Socrates does is he talks about the main leaders. He calls them guardians, the main leaders, and then
That's a fair word.
he has auxiliaries. And so there's these two grades. It's like auxiliaries are like they're like overseers or guardians in training.
Okay.
But not everyone can handle the oversight. But you got to go through that initial training first. So everybody's kind of going through being a member of the team. But you don't. It's like an old joke that some college students think that they major in management, business management, and they'll get hired as a manager right after leaving college, and nobody told them that this wasn't their ticket to be a manager right away. So I think Plato knew that there's a sort of apprenticeship in leadership, right? There's an apprenticeship in leadership. So one of the things about the allegory is you recognize that skill set, you recognize where people are, you recognize obstacles, right? Sometimes people they're uncomfortable hearing certain things, right? There might be a certain kind of feedback that they're not ready to hear. So I think I deal with this with my students too, because if somebody writes an awful paper for me, you can't give them 12 points of criticism. Right, you gotta give them a couple. This is that honey on
Right, right. Honey and
the
medicine.
edge of the medicine cup, right? So I think that that's a really important lesson too. Recognize
But
that
why can't you give him 12? Why can't you give him 12 criticisms? If it's that bad, does the guy really belong in that position? I mean,
well,
does he
that's yeah, it's like
I
if
mean, I
I tried
understand
to
the
be.
leadership part of it.
So I think that's it's a question, right? You're gonna have to make a judgment, and part of it is needing to have that experience, right? A part of what you have as the team leader or whatever it happens to be, you have experience seeing different people. And sometimes you might need to have the conversation with the person and just be like, look, this isn't for you, right? That's one judgment call, right? But if you decide this is for this person, but we need to take a step by step,
Right.
and you decide, okay, we're going to focus on this first.
Does the Republic address that in the entire? I mean, how to actually bring somebody along? Let's say,
Wh-
cultivate this person.
One of
Or
the things the Republic talks about, and this is getting a little bit maybe philosophical,
that's fine.
but it talks about our desires,
Right.
in the formation of our desires. So he talks about you got your desires for pleasure, you got your desires for rest, comfort, but then there's also desires for security, for achievement, for honor, for victory, and there's fears that go along with all of these desires, and there's hopes for fulfilling the desires, there's fears of certain desires being unfulfilled or being taken away from you. And so he does talk about these more particular aspects of human life. And I find the discussion of fear really interesting. As he says, our leaders, most of all, need to focus on what really matters. And what really matters for your political leaders is the good of your city. And so we don't want our leaders, our soldiers, our guardians to abandon their posts. Like the number one thing is for them to stand their ground. And we need to train them so that their fears are kept in check and they understand what really matters, what the main thing is. You know, there's that saying, what is it? The main thing is to keep the main thing, the main thing. I don't, you probably know who came up with that. I don't know.
No, I don't.
But this is the keeping, or as Stephen Covey with the 7 Habits
Yeah.
said, begin with the end in mind, right? Put first things first. Covey talks in his own book about how Aristotle formed his thing. And I didn't mention Aristotle earlier. You asked about him. He was Plato's student, and he wrote things that are a little more like encyclopedias. So that's why I like Plato a little better when it comes to this kind of thing, because you get invited in. So what is Plato talking about? He's saying, well, we're educating our leaders. We need them to stand their ground. We need them to be able to tactically make a decision, not based on their own interests, but on what's common, what's good for the common. In this case, a team, a real estate team, but he's thinking about it more politically, but he also uses examples thinking about like what's best for the ship, what's best for whatever, the family. So he uses a number of examples, but I love what he says about fear, that we want them to fear the right things, and they want to keep their own personal fears subordinated or in check.
You want the leaders to fear the right thing.
That's right.
And keep their personal.
So one of the phrases that Socrates uses that might be a little edgy or unpopular, but he says, we want them to fear slavery rather than death. Okay. And this is one of those things that you want to fear. And that's where it goes back to the allegory in the cave, because Socrates is thinking about slavery first and foremost about somebody controlling your thinking. Being enslaved in the mind or in the soul is the worst kind of slavery, because that person can really poke at your fears and manipulate you. And then you feel like you're free, but you're actually being controlled. So that's what he's worried about. And he says images, stories, what we would call movies and television, but he would call the theater, that these can manipulate people and enslave people's thinking. And so this whole idea of freeing your mind so that you aren't afraid of what those people who are trying to control you want you to be afraid of, but you're afraid of the right things. You're afraid of being their puppet, being their slave. It's a little deep, it's a little harsh, but one of the things that brings up is that Socrates, I think, is presenting for us a model for thinking about freedom. So freedom isn't just for him the ability to just do whatever you want. For him, freedom is about having the strength to do what needs to be done, to having the strength of character, having the knowledge,
Strength
the
of character
wisdom.
to say no when anybody, a weaker person would say yes.
That's right.
Right.
And to
stand up for what you believe.
And not just the strength of character, but also the wisdom to be able to figure out what needs to be done, right? So you could say, somebody could be really stubborn, but they don't know when they should stop and listen to somebody. So that's where the wisdom comes in, is you be able to discern who you can trust. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you make mistakes about this, but constantly being discerning about, who has my best interest and the best interest of my team at heart. And then examining your own self to say, am I motivated about what's best for my team? In my case, what's best for my students, right? Am I in there trying to give them what I find cool or interesting, or am I motivated by what they need from me? So I think there's a fear there where you have to kind of sacrifice your own interests and not be afraid to sacrifice your own interests for the good of the other.
Sure.
And that's ultimately, I think, what the Republic is about, is having the freedom and the strength to, go back down into that cave and give those people what they need, right? To not fear that.
I think, when you talk to fear, let me ask you this question. A lot of leaders fear that they'll lose control.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I mean, they
That's right.
fear they're going to lose control. They fear they're going to lose influence, status, how does that come? What's
Yeah.
2,400 years old with that?
Yeah. So that's great. I mean, as moving in that direction, in fact, because so as I said, Socrates is going to be thinking about this in terms of the political community, in terms of your leaders that are running the city or running the country, and or running the military unit or whatever it happens to be. And there were plenty of models of what we would call servant leadership and what we might call tyrannical leadership or self-interested leadership. And what he says is actually the tyrant is a very small-souled individual. That's the word that's used, small-souled, because he's afraid. As you say, he's got his own ego, he's insecure, he's motivated by fear, he's afraid that his own desires aren't going to be fulfilled, and so he clenches up. He doesn't let go. And so this is what I find so amazing about the Republic is that it's a training for freedom. A lot of people think that the ideal leader that's presented in the Republic is an authoritarian, he's got complete control. But actually, when you read carefully, the kind of ideal leader he's describing is precisely the one who lets go of control, who wants each person in the city to flourish at doing his or her particular role. And the job of the ideal leader is to unleash each of those people, to unlock and to activate that potential. So let's say going back to the cave, he's leading them to grow and cultivate the potential that's already there. And if you had a city, it's like having if everybody was a real estate coach but nobody sold houses, you'd have a real problem, right? And in some ways, you might, if you're really successful agent, you might actually prefer selling houses to
I know a
doing
lot of
the coach.
agents who prefer,
So like you got to think the
and they're
kind of
damn good at it, and they have more knowledge than
right.
you ever wanted to know.
And maybe there's things that this podcast and the coaching can teach them and help them. But what they do when they come to those podcasts, like, look, what can you do to help me do my job better, right? And I think in Plato's ideal city, the ideal leader is the one whose intentions are pure. Now, what's amazing about Plato is he understands humans can get corrupted. And that's what's so great about reading some of the Republic. About 60 pages, he describes how you can get corrupted and how that happens. And I think that gives us a window into these fears, window into how you yourself, oh, well, that was kind of a misstep there. I was more worried about my own ego, or I was too afraid to let go. I was too afraid of failure. I was too afraid of that person doing it their own way. But if you never let the guy swing a golf club for himself, he's never going to learn, right? And of course he's going to do it. I mean, look, you've golfed with me before.
Yes. Well, you can call it golf.
Yep. You got to let me do it the wrong way. If you came in and said, let me show you how to do it, let me sit in the golf cart, I'm not going to be any good for anybody. And I think that that's the kind of negative picture that Plato paints that we can learn from. That the tyrant is the small-souled person who is clinging to his power and his excellence. And
He's pretty much the tyrannical, right? I mean, he's the guy that's nobody's going to get to him. He's not going to listen to anybody.
yeah, and
He's going to run it the way he wants. He's going to run it to the ground.
and what Socrates ends up saying is he has no taste of freedom or friendship. No taste of freedom or friendship, because he himself has become a slave of his own fears. And I think that that's where, learning to defer, learning to follow somebody else's lead, that's not slavery. Slavery is the fear that drives you to just clench in, lock down, right? Never let anything go. And I think that that's one of the chief insights of this thing is when you read through it, and I'll tell you, The Republic is one of these books that every time I read it, there's something new. So if any of your listeners say, I'm going to give this thing a try, and you open it up and you're like, my God, what is going on here?
I got a little confession to make. John's got 6 copies.
But I read it every year teaching my students, and every time there's something new. So I tell my students that they have to read it, unlike your listeners. I tell them, it's like, look, if you understood everything on the first read, this thing wouldn't be worth reading. The only reason it's worth reading is because there's something new every time. So one of the things I take from it is it describes the ideal human person as somebody who can lead his own life in such a way that's not driven by fear, but is driven by this big souled freedom, this freedom to pursue what really matters, that main thing, right? And I think for each individual person, that main thing is going to be something different. That's where the wisdom comes in. It's figuring out in your own life, well, if I fail at being a real estate agent, which I totally would, if I maybe last 2 weeks or so, it's not the end of the world if I fail at being a real estate agent, because that's not my skill set. And I have to be discerning about what my job in this world is, and how do I contribute to that city, as it were.
All good stuff, John. All good stuff. Let me ask you a question because you brought it up. You talked about the 60 pages of corruption.
Yeah.
Okay. And having known many, many leaders over the years, many different jobs and posts, I've been doing this for 20. Prior to that, let's talk about corruption. What corrupts a leader? I mean, honestly, everybody starts out with, hopefully, with the good intention of doing what's right for the team.
Yeah.
At least I think most people do. I know I do. What's best for the team? What corrupts the leader?
Yeah. So that's one of the things that happens early in the Republic. And some people are like, what does this have to do with leadership? Is he talks about the right stories for the kids, making sure the kids hear the right stories, making sure they have the right heroes, making sure that the villains that they're presented with are truly the villains, and the heroes they're presented with really present strength of character and good models or paradigms for virtue and character and wisdom. And you might say, well, what is this? I'm not here to study literature. I want to know what this has to do with leadership. Well, he starts there because he says the message you receive in childhood and the heroes that you're presented with in childhood stick with you forever. And we're starting to learn this with psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy and things like this, that the early childhood experiences can stick with you forever. And sometimes those childhood experiences are traumatic. They send you the wrong way. So one of the interesting things in that 60 pages of corruption is he talks about how early childhood experiences might skew those desires I was talking about. You might, because of what you experience at home, you might have a fear of being boxed in. And so you're going to go for that new experience. You're going to spend too much on that new technology because you have this fear from your child because your parents were stingy and you never got that, you know, Xbox or whatever it is. You never got that game console. And so now you have this deep wound where
Desire.
yeah, this desire for like the new technology. But you might also, just in the reverse, you might as a child have experienced poverty. And so now when you're running a team or a business, you're too afraid to spend money. You're clenching to that money. So what's interesting about the Republic is some people say it's a book about political theory. I don't care about political theory. Well, it's just as much a book about psychology. It's the source text for a lot of psychology. Not everybody's a fan of Freud, but Freud has three parts of the psyche, and he got those three parts undeniably. Everybody agrees on this from Plato. You got your higher intellect, you got your baser desires, and then you got this desire for honor, victory, this sort of thing in the middle. So to answer your question about where does that corruption come from, I think a lot of leaders, they don't realize how their own personal issues grow out into their business. And that works for the good too. They may not realize that their own personal strengths become the strength of the business enterprise. So I think, there's just an honesty about that. What does Socrates say? You just start with a recognition of the reality of it. You say, okay, I have these personal strengths, a certain skill set, so I need to pursue that kind of business, that kind of trade, that kind of enterprise. But you might also realize that I got to work through this anger issue. And it's not just in my own personal life at home where the anger issue might come out, maybe that comes out in your business. You start to realize, same sorts of things keep happening to me with clients, with coworkers, with my kids. You say, oh my goodness, that's a personal problem.
So is that what he's calling corruption?
Well, and I think that, corruption's my word. He
Right.
talks about it as a kind of devolution of the soul. He says it's a kind of degradation of the soul. And he thinks that the soul of the leader, and the soul is kind of an old-fashioned word, but we say like the state of character of the leader is reflected in the organization he leads. And so if you have somebody who's really afraid to let go, that's going to shape his business enterprise. Or if he's a political leader, that's going to shape his approach to politics. If you got somebody who's afraid to spend money.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
Abe Beame, New York City mayor,
Yeah.
drove us into bankruptcy. Koch, how am I doing?
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, 4 years later, New York City's on top of the world. Two different. One guy's a bean counter.
Yeah.
He was an accountant. Everything was nickels and dimes, spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And then we went into Ed Koch, who was wide
Right.
open and come on in.
And what's great about that story, though, is that you need somebody who can do the bean counting.
Yes, I agree.
And they have to be doing their job, and somebody who's got their eye on the whole and who has the wisdom to make those discernments, to make that judgment when to spend, when to save, right? Because we've also known cities that have been, you spend too much money and you don't spend money at all, right? This is a problem. I like thinking about local politics. I think if you're somebody, I know you're familiar with local politics in a number of different angles, given your life experience. Most people today know very little about their local government.
Guarantee you.
And in many ways, that's one thing that you get from ancient political theory is the idea that, look, those political communities were a lot smaller. And we tend to think a lot about national politics, but I think we might be a lot better off if people thought
Keep it local,
a little bit more about their local communities.
Yeah, I've said this for years, and being a former, not a politician, but elected official, the people really, what I found with people is they just want to know that they're safe,
Mm-hmm.
and that somebody's taking care of the whole thing.
Yeah.
They're not too concerned about each issue. They're not too concerned, but it goes back to they just want to feel safe.
Yeah.
And if you want to keep bringing up 12 different problems you're having,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be the mayor the next year.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to hear the bad stuff. They just want to hear the good stuff. They want to hear the
Yeah.
sugar on the poison.
Yeah.
The
poison. I didn't say medicine here.
medicine,
yeah, right.
poison.
But
It's what it is.
but they also, I think, they want to be free to flourish. So you think about
Totally.
the people that own their businesses. It's like, also, don't get in my way, right? I understand there's got to be regulations, there's got to be taxes, there's got to be rules of a certain kind. But there's a certain kind of political official that says, oh, you want me to take care of it for you? I'll take care of it for you. And then that's that micromanagement thing that comes in. So there's, we're coming up against this idea of the golden mean. I don't know if, you got to spend the right amount. You don't want to be too tight fisted. You don't want to be, spend too much, right? You want the right amount. You want to support your community as the political leader, as the mayor, what have you. You want to make them feel safe. You want it to be secure. You also don't want to micromanage. You don't want to be intervening. So that's where I think this idea coming out of Socrates that wisdom is the most important feature of a leader, that being able to discern, and it's not wisdom like some kind of abstract, what people think of as philosophy, right? It's not this abstract, it's this very concrete, everyday, practical judgment, or as I like to use the word, discernment, being able to look at a situation and read the best path forward through the realities of that situation. And so this idea of the golden mean, we often talk about this, but Plato's student Aristotle is the one who just defined this and said, the virtues of character, or the excellence, strength of character, is always a mean, right? So true courage is not the absence of fear. It's the mean or middle path between cowardice and just rushing into battle like a fool, right? And so I think with leadership, you encounter that, right? There's certain things you should be afraid of, right?
Healthy fear is good.
Yeah, but fearing the right things under the right
Right.
circumstances and so forth, that's hard. And you have to have wisdom to know that, to tell the difference. And that's again not an abstract wisdom. You don't get that from a textbook. I think maybe that's something that people tend to think of philosophy as something that's done in a textbook. Something I talk to my students about, and I was just writing something up for the new semester about how we need to have lab sections for philosophy classes. We need to find, like, go out and I want you to see, are your friendships the kind of friendships that Plato and Aristotle think are the best kind of friendships? Or do you think maybe that guy is or that gal is they're limiting me. Maybe they're awakening being friends with that person or being keeping company with those people, maybe they're awakening those fears, those desires, and
Sure.
that's leaning into it's kind of a bad influence. So bringing things back to what you were asking about earlier, that corruption. Sometimes this isn't just an individual thing or a childhood thing, but it's also a who you choose to surround
Your
yourself with.
corruption may be coming from friends, supposed friends,
Yeah, yeah.
and acquaintances. I know, and this is probably where it came from. Who'd say was this Plato or Aristotle that brought up the friend?
Yeah, Aristotle's got a nice theory of friendship. But again, all this stuff, Plato gives you what's great about I think Plato and Aristotle is you get Plato gives you like a conversational introduction to these things, and he doesn't just give you the answer. He kind of leads you through. Whereas Aristotle,
He
he
gave
kind
you
of lays it out, right? He kind of lays it out. So I always ask my students when we get about mid semester, they've read some Plato, they've read some Aristotle. Yeah, I say, well, who liked Plato more? And they tend to be the more individuals that like ambiguity. They
right,
like things that are a little messy. They like they're talkers. But the people who like Aristotle, they tend to be like the engineers, the accounting, and they just like it's like this is very I can kind of control it.
right.
I get the point. And I think you need both. I think that there's a way where sometimes you need to lay it all out, and sometimes you need to lead people through in a more conversational way. So the answer to your question about friendship, both of them talk about friendship. But whenever it comes to giving like a really broken down theory, that's tends to be more Aristotle.
I'm gonna say because in our world we always you are the average of the five people that you
Yeah,
surround yourself with.
right.
Which goes back to if you have corrupt people, there's, most of the people here know that at one time I like beer, and it's been quite a few years since I've had it. But I look back at the people that my five people back then,
Yeah,
it was corrupting me. I was corrupting them. They were corrupting me.
yeah,
It was a general agreement that we were going to corrupt each other. And now I look back and I go, it really didn't serve me.
yeah. And I think sometimes you don't get to choose who you're around. So you're on a team with somebody
Right.
and you say, well, okay, I'm going to go into this interaction knowing that this person triggers my fears about whatever, or this person triggers my anger about this or that. And so again, I think this idea of discernment, there's this other theory, you said I teach at Catholic University, and so there's this idea in the Christian tradition called examining your conscience, which really means just like looking over, I didn't really interact with that teammate very well, or I didn't really uh, things could have gone better with that sales pitch, right? You just sort of looking over, or as a friend of mine likes to say, it's like you watch the tapes. You miss a tackle,
Right. You
your
got to go
coach
back
makes
and
sure
watch
you watch the tapes, right? You go back and watch the tapes.
what do we do good? What do we do bad?
That's right. And so part of examining that is discerning not only what did I do wrong, but it says, okay, I'm going to be in that situation again tomorrow. And again, part of what's brilliant, I think, about Plato's approach to leadership is that he says that there's this agency that we all have in our own desires and our own response, our own fears, and so on and so forth, that we can then prepare ourselves and take that self-knowledge, that awareness of ourselves to do better in the next interaction. So, there's all this talk about growth mindset and so forth today. That's all right there in the ancient thinkers. It's certainly there.
2,400 years ago, we're
That's
talking
right.
growth.
Yeah, that's
Just
right.
use different words.
That's right. And I think, look, it's a reality that we all have the baggage we have, but we're not victims to it. So when you're a leader, when you're a parent, you can try to do better. We talk another saying that people use today is changing your family tree, right? Is
Changing your family DNA,
yeah, right. They say DNA now. That's
tree,
fancy.
whatever it
Yeah,
is.
right. But you say, okay, I was exposed to these heroes and I had to learn that those heroes were actually villains. Or somebody taught me that this was good and I realized this was not so great. Or I wasn't prepared for this fear and it caught me by surprise and I need to prepare my kids better for this or whatever it happens to be. Going into those experiences as a leader of your own life, I think is something you get from Plato. So it's like not only does the soul of the leader shape the organization, but there's a way in which when you look at your own life, your own soul, your own character, you're the CEO of that. You might not have the top position of the team you're in or the university you're in or the sports team you're in or whatever. But when you look in on yourself, you are the leader there. So the personal and the leadership goes both ways, I think. And that's the brilliance of this work. I think that's why it's been so influential. Is because it's got both sides of the equation
It's
there.
been around for 2,400 years. It must have done something.
Yeah, right.
Great conversation, by the way. I'm enjoying it.
One of the things I don't know if I've said this
Yeah.
yet, but personnel is policy. Heard that?
Personnel is policy.
Have you heard that saying
Dive,
before?
dive.
So this is something I've heard that sometimes, most often, maybe you can't design the right policies. You can't if you design all the right policies, stuff's still going to go wrong.
Sure.
If you got the right team, you got the right team leader, the right policies might not be necessary. And you got the wrong team leader,
I,
they're not going to be enough,
right. I agree
right?
with that. Yeah.
And that's why this education thing matters so much to somebody like Plato. Is he says the most important thing is to educate your leaders and educate them from youth, right? To have the right strength of character, to have the right to fear the right things and to be strong and courageous against the right things and
I
so
think,
forth.
the way you said that, it just dinged in my mind, which is usually vacant. But, when I first started being a team leader, being a leader, period, the rules, the rules,
Oh
the
yeah.
rules, the rules, the rules, everything was the rules, the rules. Nowadays, and I mean, you had a 13-page contract for the rules, for the rules. Nowadays, I got 2 or 3 pages. Hey, you know what? This is what's happening.
Yeah.
We're here to help you. Sometimes it doesn't work out. This is what's going to happen at the end.
Yeah.
And that's the way I feel my leadership is. We got rules. You're going to live within
Yeah.
these rules, and hopefully it's transformative. Um, but yeah, I can see that growth over the years to where it was a 13 page. Now it's 2 or 3 that says, we're going
Yeah.
to work together. It doesn't work out. We're done.
And I think, and it goes a number of different directions here too, is that you think, well, if we have the right laws, if we have the right rules, if we have the right policies, then the board selecting the CEO, well, it's not that big of a deal, right? They can sort of wash their hands of these personnel decisions and the executive decision. And then when you're the executive, oftentimes they won't exercise. You imagine your bad executive, they'll hide behind the rules. They'll say, well, it's the
Rule
policies are
says,
policies, the
yeah.
rules. And it says, well, no, what we need is somebody to make a decision. And so part of the flip side of this personnel is policy thing is that, well, there's serious responsibilities that come with being an executive, making executive decisions, and there's people's lives on the line, so forth. So I think that goes back. You want somebody who has the wisdom, who has the discernment to make the right call, but who's in it for the right reasons, who's got that goodwill or that purity of intention that you said.
John, I know that Plato had something to say about justice.
Yeah.
Where did that wind up in the book?
Yeah. So it's in book 1, actually. So if again,
And Well, the Republic is broken down into books.
It's in 10 books. Yeah. So yeah.
And it's only 300 pages long. So it's not like the book is.
But
Yeah.
I will say, when I read book 1 of the Republic, it's got a feeling of an end to it, kind of open-ended stopping point. I read the first book of the Republic maybe 8 times before I read past the first book of the Republic, and it's all about justice. So if you try to read this thing and you get to page 30 and you're like, where the hell is all this stuff about education? I told all this great stuff in here. Where is it? You got to get through this stuff about justice. And in fact, this thing about justice frames the whole book. And so I should say something about that. So what is justice? Well, justice, I don't know what it means today, but it kind of meant righteousness, or just being of excellent character.
Okay.
Justice had this sense of being all around
Ethical?
Good, ethical, yeah, virtuous. And but it also had this more particular sense of um, being ethical in your interactions and exchanges with people. And so one of the things Socrates is worried about in this conversation, and there's a lot to be said. I mean, we could go on for a whole course on this.
I'm sure we can go on.
But one of the things he faces is, why should you be just? We could quibble about the definition of justice, the definition of virtue, the definition of what it means to be ethical. But just like today, there were people then who say, right, well, but what's in it for me? The people who are just and virtuous and ethical, they end up being somebody else's tool. And so you get a character talking to Socrates who's actually praised for being honest and courageous, who says, no. I want to be a tyrant. Tell me why the tyrant isn't the happiest person. He's the guy that's out there. He doesn't care about the rules. He doesn't care about some ethical code. He's just in it for himself. That's the winner. Everybody else are losers, right? Look at taxes. Who pays the most taxes? It's the Boy Scout who cares about being ethical, right? And we've heard these kind of arguments. They certainly predate Plato,
Sure.
These kind of arguments. So the challenge of the Republic is to say, why should somebody care about being ethical? In other words, what's in it for me to be ethical? And the argument that Socrates ends up saying is, well, being ethical, being just, what justice is truly about is about having a healthy character. It's not about what I do with you. It's about what's going on inside me. And then what I do with people around me, well, that flows from what I am inside. And so the whole book is an extended conversation about why somebody should be ethical rather than not, why somebody should be just rather than unjust.
Well, that seems pretty. I mean, I would think everybody would go with being just is the right.
Well, what about if nobody's watching? What if you could be
but
guaranteed
that
you'd
goes
be
to
getting
your own
away?
character.
Well, right. So that's what he says.
That goes down to your character.
What he says is, imagine somebody. This is actually one of the people that Socrates is talking to. And I think Socrates is actually training this guy in the art of having these conversations. Glaucon, in fact, is one of the guys in the Republic. And he's Plato's brother, as it turns out. So this guy says, well, imagine I had a ring that made me invisible and I could get away with whatever I wanted. Why would I be just then? Why don't I just get ring of invisibility sound familiar to anybody? Ring of power sound familiar? I mean, these ideas are very ancient. And people argue about whether Plato even invented this idea, the ring of invisibility.
He had to get it from somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, well, some people wonder, he might have been the inventor of it, but there's no source prior. It seems the people argue, though. People argue about, scholars, I should say, argue about this. But what I want to say is, like, well, if you had no consequences, if you could be guaranteed to get away with it, why wouldn't you be unjust? Why wouldn't you be unethical? Why wouldn't you take advantage of people?
Because I have to answer to myself.
And what Socrates says is, well, the person who trains himself, who's conditioned, who's habituated, who's in the habit of constantly feeding those desires and hiding, right? Getting away with it, hiding. It's not just about the afterlife, right? It's not just about going to hell or something like that. That's not what he's worried. It's that conditioning will make you fearful, will make you cling to things, will make you uncontrolled. And that's the person, he's the tyrant, is somebody that is that trained to pursue whatever he wants with no consequences while also hiding from all the people around him, constantly wearing a mask, that person has no taste of freedom or friendship. And so part of what Socrates is doing in the Republic is he's saying the reason education is so important, the reason leadership is so important is because you want to lead your own life in such a way that you are truly free and that you can be true friends to people. And that requires that you not be afraid of reality, that you're not hiding from the consequences of your actions, that you're willing to stand in the open, right? Stand outside the cave. You're not hiding in shadows. So I think, people will often use the allegory, the cave image, alongside this ring image, this ring of invisibility image. Because if you're virtuous, if you're doing the right thing, you don't need that ring. You don't need to hide, right? You might need to, sweet talk people. You might need that honey. But if you're doing the right thing,
If it's for the good of the person
right.
and not yourself, you're staying just to yourself and you're
Yeah, you're
is that what
serving
I'm
the
hearing?
others' need. And
Right.
so I think that, people might get, if they try to read the Republic, the main question of the first 40 pages is what is justice, and whatever it happens to be, why would that be good for me to do? Maybe if there's some God that will condemn me to hell, okay, I can see that argument. But what if not, right?
What if he wasn't there?
And the whole Republic is an argument that, like, virtue, being ethical, being just is a really healthy state of the soul that is free from fear, that's free from the kind of micromanaging desires and so forth. That there's a strength in that freedom and that strength of character gives you a freedom and a confidence, I think, that you're not threatened by people on your team. You're not threatened by obstacles,
Right.
right? Because you know that you're going to have the wisdom and
Got
discernment
the
to
wisdom to get
navigate
through
that.
the fear and right.
Yeah,
It's been a great at the end of the day, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates have a very strong influence on leadership today. Even though we have changed it into modern colloquialisms and, little short sayings, you are the
yeah.
average of the five people,
Personnel is
be on
policy, so
be
change your
uncomfortable,
family tree.
get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah,
These are all shortened versions of what we can find in the Republic.
yeah,
Do you agree with that?
yeah.
Right?
And
I
they
mean,
had their slogans too. I
sure.
mean, they had the same thing.
I'm sure they were much deeper than ours, but
Uh, Great things are hard
great things are hard.
is one of the ones
Sure,
that
great.
Socrates quotes a
And I
lot.
think if
Nothing great is easy
so let me ask you this question because the first thing that hit me when you said great things are hard. John F. Kennedy, no, the speech in Texas
for the space
for
bar.
the space. We don't do these things because they're hard. We do these things because we can. Right? Isn't that the way it goes?
We don't do these
We don't
things
do
because
these
they're easy, but
things
because
because
they're
they're
hard.
hard.
Yeah,
That's why we do. Okay. So it's just we live the
Now, okay, so we've talked the good business to start, but now let's go and explore.
into something deeply human. And one of his greatest insights is that there's this inner life, this inner city, he calls it, and seeing each individual person as a leader of that city, that there's a freedom in that, there's an agency in that. And then seeing how that spills out into our interactions with our families, our teams, our communities, and so forth. I think that he was able to plot a course or take us on a path into a conversation that touches on these things, but in a way that gets us thinking about them. And I think, what you want in a teacher, you know, why do I exist? Is one question I ask my students when I do this. I say, like, this is a book that can change your life, but you need somebody to unlock it for you. It's just too hard, right? For most people. Some people are brilliant and they can sort of figure it out. I certainly needed people to unlock it for me. But it's the kind of thing that can really change the way you see the world once you have somebody
So let
unlock
me
it.
ask you a question, John, Dr. John Buttaci. If I were to put together, this just came to my mind, if I would put together 10, 15, 20 people that would like to unlock the Republic, would you be interested in unlocking that book with them during some off hour?
That'd be fun.
I
Yeah.
mean, like just like we're doing here through a podcast or something?
And the truth is, I'd probably learn stuff I hadn't seen before.
Sure.
It's that kind of text. And the best part of talking to different people, right? I mean, I have lots of different students studying lots of different things, and these would be people I imagine with lots of different life experiences.
Yes.
I know talking to you, you got all kinds of life experiences that I don't have and never will have. So part of the unlocking of the text is having different kinds of people reading it with you. So reading it alongside folks like that would unlock it for me too.
I would love to see that happen, simply because I think it's now I have gotten probably halfway through that book, and you know what? It's just it's there, but it's got to be unlocked somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
like you said, I went through Justice, book one. I'm going, wait a second, this is a little, but as I talked through, even with your son Raymond, I learned a little bit. And Raymond is 9 years old, and we had a conversation on justice one day. It truly is life changing.
Well, you were talking about how I have those 6 copies or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I have an extra copy I kept in my car, and Raymond discovered it, and he was reading through it when we were driving home from something, and he said, "Dad, this book, it's just like people talking to each other." And I said, "Well,
It's
there
not
it
a
is.
hard book
It's
to
not,
read. It
it's
is not a hard book to
it's
read.
deceptive." A friend of mine likes to say, and this is a person who taught me a lot about how to read Plato, Dave O'Connor, is a professor at Notre Dame. He liked to say, Aristotle, the way Aristotle writes, it's like a house where there's all these windows and you can see all kinds of interesting things going on the inside, but you can't find the door. But Plato makes everything look like a door, but you still can't get in. So what's amazing about reading Plato is that it feels like, it's like, how do I not understand? This is written. I know what each word means. Whereas when you read Aristotle, you're like, I don't know what that sentence meant. But you can figure out what each sentence means when you're reading the Republic. But then you got to step back and say, well, how is this all fitting together? And I do think that exercise of watching how the conversation goes, you learn things about how to have conversations, I think, too. So the exercise isn't just about learning what the argument is in the book, but you start to learn, well, that example is really helpful. I can use that. I put that in my back pocket. Or maybe it's not helpful in 2025, and I got to come up with a new one that's going to work for these. I mean, like we talked a little bit about how do you get control of the ship, right? How do you, when you have the wisdom, how do you convince people that they should trust you to lead? And sometimes you got to use the shadows. Sometimes you got to use that strategy going back down into the cave, right? You can't hit them with everything all at once.
Right.
Well, one of my students this past semester was running for student body president, and they actually have some power. They control quite a budget at a lot of universities. This is a position that's got a lot of power. Well, 2 of the people on the ticket, the student running for president and the student running for treasurer, so arguably the 2 more powerful positions, were in my class on the Republic. And when they started, they were polling at 12%. And then we started having these conversations about leadership, about communication, about how to have these conversations. And they ended up winning. Honest to God, he's going around telling people that it's because of Plato, it's because of what he learned from Plato's Republic that they were able to win the election. So really proud of him. He won the election. Let's see what he does as president and as treasurer. But he was able to make the case. So I think you not just learn about leadership and educate, but you learn about how to do it, I think. So watching the conversations.
I'm really intrigued with the book idea. I think a book club would be great. And that would be good. A book, what do you call it?
Seminar, you call them maybe.
Seminar, book club, whatever you want to call
Workshop.
it. Workshop. I mean, I wouldn't think that you'd go as deep as you are with some of your guys, with some of your class. I've been in one of John's classes, by the way. Very engaging. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that. I'm gonna look into that.
It's as you say, it's 300 pages, but it's 300 pages.
It's 300 pages. That's a
Yeah,
look. It's not a big book. I don't think you have to go. Who's the person that's gonna? It's somebody that wants to be a leader. Somebody that is a leader wants more depth, more understanding of what a good leader is. Failed leaders, maybe. What did I
Yeah,
do wrong? How can I improve myself?
that's right.
I think it crosses, gosh, every industry, every discipline, because we all have, whether you're running an ER or, a classroom, schools.
One of the things that this phrase, this ancient Greek phrase that gets used is the eye of experience.
The eye of experience.
And that's self-explanatory. That somebody that's been in the ER or that's been a salesman for many, many years will have an eye of experience, which means they can pick up on subtle things that maybe the non-expert you never see.
Do it every day.
And people, there's this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, I think it is, and he talks about how, and I think what's the guy's name, Gladwell,
Clever.
talks about this too. He's riffing on some of that material, that firefighters can go into a house and know implicitly, can say like, this is about the floor is about to collapse,
Right.
and they can't explain why they know it, but they have the eye of experience can kind of, like, they know, get out of here, get out of here. But they can't explain what they know, but they know it. And I think what's helpful about this kind of seminar is that it can give leaders the language for articulating that experience. They can say, that's that abstract concept that I've been seeing when I'm leading my team,
Right.
or when I'm part of a team with a leader that's maybe not the best, or maybe when I failed as a leader. It's like I didn't have the words to describe exactly what was going on there,
Sure.
but now I have. So experience gives you a certain implicit knowledge, we'll call it, or tacit knowledge. But part of what this kind of philosophical, more reflective, theoretical can give you the words to describe it. And the reason that's helpful is because when you're trying to communicate what you know, when you're trying to communicate your experience, you can't just say, well, I don't know, I just saw it, right? You need to be able to, so this is what I mean by, like, the sheep can have a knowledge that they can't speak because they're sheep. And so what you want is to have that eye of experience that's trained with those concepts.
I talk to you about philosophy. I'm a fish out of water. I'm nowhere near deep. But
Yeah.
you want to talk about real estate? I can riff for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I've experienced, I understand it, I know it.
And this is where it's really hard because, one of the ways we could have run this session, and maybe we need to read it, is that you come at me with stuff about real estate. And then I tell you, oh, well, this is this aspect of it. And oh, wow.
That's what.
Okay, that's the theory. It's because I fall into this myself, which is what I call abstraction. We're sort of, you're up in the clouds. But I'll tell you, Plato, Aristotle, they emphasize the importance of concrete experience more than anybody at that time. And one of the biggest complaints that Aristotle had, at least, was that too many people are trying to learn how to be leaders from textbooks. What you need is a very hands-on education that gets you talking about and reflecting on what you're doing. So that's kind of circling back to your coaching, right? You don't want somebody, you don't go and check out a textbook and sit at a desk and read for perfecting your golf swing. Maybe you check